When it comes to gun rights in America, battles are usually fought in state legislatures, courts, and Congress. But sometimes the fight comes from a direction you might not expect. That's exactly what we're seeing right now. The Department of Justice, yes, the federal DOJ, has just delivered a 7-day ultimatum to the state of Washington, demanding that it dismantle a law known as the Keep Washington Working Act. On the surface, this law is about immigration enforcement, but if you peel back the layers, you'll see why this is much bigger than immigration. This case could set the stage for dismantling Second Amendment sanctuary laws across the United States. And that means the guns you own, the rights you depend on, and the protection you assume you have from state-level sanctuary laws could all be in jeopardy. So in today's video, we're going to break this down step by step. We'll explain what Washington's law says, why the DOJ is going after it now, what penalties the state could face, and why legal experts believe this is a test run for targeting gun sanctuary states like Texas, Arizona, Montana, and Idaho. Stick with me until the end, because once you understand what's at stake, you'll realize this fight isn't just about Washington. It's about every gun owner in America. Let's start with the basics. Back in 2019, Washington State passed the Keep Washington Working Act. On paper, this was pitched as an immigrant rights law. What it actually does is prohibit state and local law enforcement from cooperating with federal immigration enforcement agencies, specifically Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE. That means if ICE agents request assistance from a local police department in Washington, that department is legally blocked from helping. And if a sheriff or police chief decides to help anyway, the state can come down on them hard. That's not hypothetical. It already happened. Dale Wagner, a sheriff in Washington, chose to cooperate with ICE because he believed it was the right thing to do for his community. What did the state do? They sued him. That case caught the attention of the DOJ, which now argues that Washington isn't just declining to help federal enforcement, it's actively obstructing it. And under the Constitution, federal law is supposed to be supreme when it conflicts with state law. That's where the Department of Justice comes in. Just days ago, the DOJ issued a formal ultimatum. Washington has 7 days to dismantle or stop enforcing the Keep Washington Working Act. If it doesn't, the consequences will be severe. We're not just talking about lawsuits. We're talking about potential criminal charges against state officials who enforce the law, cutting off millions of dollars in federal funding for law enforcement agencies across Washington, and opening the door to endless civil litigation. This is a big deal. Imagine being a police chief or sheriff in Washington right now. If you follow state law and refuse to help ICE, you risk being prosecuted by the feds. If you follow federal law and cooperate with ICE, you risk being sued by your own state. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. That's exactly the kind of pressure the DOJ wants to create, because it forces a constitutional showdown. Now, why should gun owners care about any of this? Because the DOJ's playbook here could easily be applied to state laws protecting the Second Amendment. Think about it. In the past few years, several states have declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries. That means they've passed laws saying state and local officials can't enforce federal gun control regulations. States like Missouri, Texas, Montana, and Arizona have made it clear they won't lift a finger to help the federal government enforce new restrictions on firearms. Sound familiar? It's the same concept. Washington says local cops can't help enforce immigration law. Gun sanctuary states say local cops can't help enforce gun law. If the DOJ can break Washington's immigration sanctuary by arguing it obstructs federal supremacy, what's to stop them from breaking Second Amendment sanctuaries next? This isn't just speculation. Legal experts are already warning about it. They point out that if the DOJ wins here, the precedent will be clear. States cannot interfere, directly or indirectly, with federal law enforcement. And once that door is open, the DOJ can march right into Texas, Montana, or Idaho and say, your gun sanctuary laws, they're illegal. You have 7 days to dismantle them, or we'll come after your funding, your officials, and your courts. Let's pause here and consider what that would mean. Over the past decade, more than 1,200 counties across America have declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries. Entire states have joined in, passing legislation to shield their citizens from federal overreach. These sanctuary laws are one of the strongest symbolic, and sometimes practical, protections gun owners have against Washington, D.C. If the DOJ can dismantle one kind of sanctuary law, they can dismantle another. Of course, supporters of the DOJ's actions will tell you this is just about immigration. They'll say Washington's law goes too far, that it doesn't just decline to help ICE but actively blocks federal enforcement. They'll argue that this has nothing to do with guns. But here's the problem. The Constitution doesn't draw a neat line between immigration sanctuaries and gun sanctuaries. The legal principle is the same. Can a state refuse to cooperate with federal enforcement? If the DOJ says no in one case, they'll say no in the other. Now, let's talk penalties again, because they matter. The DOJ isn't bluffing. They've threatened to cut off millions of dollars in federal funding that local police departments rely on for equipment, training, and personnel. Losing that money would cripple departments, especially in rural areas. They've also threatened to personally prosecute state officials who enforce the sanctuary law. Imagine being a governor, attorney general, or sheriff facing federal charges just for following state law. That's the level of pressure being applied right now. And this is where gun owners need to wake up. If you live in a Second Amendment sanctuary state, you might think you're protected. You might believe your state will shield you from future federal gun bans or restrictions. But if the DOJ succeeds against Washington, your state's protection could vanish overnight. That shield might not be worth the paper it's printed on. So where does this fight go from here? Most likely to the courts. Washington will almost certainly resist the DOJ's ultimatum. That means lawsuits, injunctions, and appeals. Eventually, this case could make its way up to the Supreme Court, and if it does, the ruling won't just affect immigration law. It will shape the balance of power between state and federal governments on every issue, including the Second Amendment. Some legal scholars point to the anti-commandeering doctrine, which basically says the federal government cannot force state officials to enforce federal law. This doctrine has been upheld in multiple Supreme Court cases, from Prince v. United States in 1997 to Murphy v. NCAA in 2018. If the court applies that doctrine here, Washington might win. But if the court narrows or overturns it, then gun sanctuaries are finished. Let's zoom out for a moment. What we're witnessing is part of a larger strategy by the federal government to centralize control, whether it's immigration, healthcare, environmental regulation, or gun rights. Washington, D.C. wants states to fall in line. States that resist are being targeted one by one, and the DOJ is the spear tip of that effort. For gun owners, the lesson is clear. Don't assume your state can protect you forever. Stay informed, stay engaged, and be ready to fight these battles at both the state and federal level. Now, let me share some practical advice. First, if you live in Washington, pay close attention to this case. Your state officials are about to make decisions that could cost millions in funding and reshape the relationship between your police and federal agencies. Second, if you live in a gun sanctuary state, don't get complacent. Those laws are under a new kind of threat, and the battle for your rights may shift from your state capitol to a federal courtroom. Third, keep an eye on the Supreme Court. This is exactly the kind of case that could land on their docket in the next year or two, and the ruling will have national consequences. Finally, remember that rights aren't protected by words on paper alone. They're protected by citizens who demand them, fight for them, and refuse to let them be eroded. The DOJ may have Washington in its sights today, but tomorrow it could be your state, your county, your town. The only way to stop that is to stay vigilant and make your voice heard. So let's wrap this up. The Department of Justice's ultimatum to Washington over its immigration sanctuary law is about much more than immigration. It's a test case, a warning shot aimed at every state that dares to resist federal power. If the DOJ wins here, the precedent could be used to crush Second Amendment sanctuaries nationwide. That means your state's promise to protect your gun rights could be swept away with the stroke of a pen. For gun owners, this is a wake-up call. Pay attention, stay engaged, and be ready to defend your rights at every level of government. Because the fight for the Second Amendment is no longer just about passing or blocking new gun laws. It's about whether states themselves will be allowed to stand up to Washington, D.C. That's a real battle, and it's one we can't afford to lose. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay informed, and as always, stay prepared.